Even if you earn more money next year than you did this year, you could still be poorer next year than you are this year. Does that make any sense? You need to ask yourself this right now. Every time the US prints money, do you get any of it? If the total amount of money in the world suddenly increases, but you don't get any of that newly printed cash, aren't you getting poorer? Let's say you're super successful. Your job allows you to earn an extra $100 next year. But because the US printed money, countless other people suddenly have an extra $1,000, but you only got $100. So, even though the amount of money in your hand has increased, you are relatively poorer compared to everyone else. This means that every time they print money, you don't have to do a thing. You don't need to spend money. You don't need to be scammed. The money not only didn't leave your wallet, it even increased because you worked harder. But as long as you don't get a share of that new money, you will still get poorer. Can you understand this concept? Simply put, printing money is an opportunity to dilute wealth. If your wealth isn't diluted, but others' wealth is, you become richer than them. And today, I'm here to tell you that the era of massive money printing is not far. Are you truly prepared for 2026? Hello everyone, I'm MoneyZen. The more money a country prints, the less valuable that country's currency becomes, right? So, many people think the US printing money is the US business. The dollar losing value is an American problem. What does that have to do with me? Let's look at this chart. If this blue line goes up, it means the Federal Reserve is printing more and more money. And we can clearly see that the Fed barely printed any money before. But since the 2008 financial crisis and the 2020 pandemic, the speed of the Fed's printing press has multiplied several times over. So, logically, the US dollar should be worthless paper by now, right? Yet, you find that 1 US dollar can still buy 155 Japanese yen, 7 Chinese yuan, and 4 Malaysian ringgit. To put it simply, the value of the US dollar is still 155 times of the yen, 7 times of the yuan, and 4 times of the ringgit. This means that no matter how much the US prints, the US dollar is still worth more than most of the money in the world. Why? Because the US isn't the only one printing money. In fact, the entire world is printing, and some are even printing more aggressively than the US. What does that mean? A 3-year-old child doesn't need much fabric for their clothes, but when he turns 18, you can't still make them wear the 3-year-old's clothes, right? The economy is the same. If the GDP grows from 1 trillion to 2 trillion, but there's still only 1 trillion in the market, what happens? Deflation. You're making more and more products today, but there isn't enough money in the market to buy them. Simply put, you can't sell your goods, so you have to close down and lay off people. Then the whole thing collapses. So, the bigger the child, the bigger the clothes, the bigger the economy, the more money is required. Otherwise, it will be strangled and unable to breathe. In 2008, the US GDP was only 14 trillion. Now, the US GDP is 28 trillion. It has doubled. So, can the US just print money? Therefore, first, we must realize one thing. Printing money isn't just a US thing. As long as a country's economy improves, it must print money. Mainland China prints money. Japan prints money. And Europe prints money. This means if you think the country you live in is going to get better economically, you have to be mentally prepared. Your country is definitely going to print money. And every time they print money, the money you previously earned will become less valuable. So, the US printing money is not only relevant to you, but it's even more relevant to you than to Americans. Why? Because every time the US prints money, the rest of the world not only follows suit, but often prints more than the US. What does that mean? How aggressively a country prints money isn't measured by the absolute amount they printed, but by the ratio of the money they printed to their GDP. It's like judging someone's drinking tolerance. You can't just say a person who drank 5 beers is a heavy drinker. If that person weighs 100 kilograms, 5 beers might just make him tipsy. But if he only weighs 50 kilograms, those 5 beers might be enough to knock him out cold. So, to judge if someone can drink, you can't just look at how much he drank. You have to look at his body weight. Similarly, you can't just look at how much money a country printed. You have to look at its GDP. We can see that Even though the US aggressively printed money starting in 2008 and 2020, but even if they're still printing until now, the money they printed only accounts for 21% of their GDP. What about Europe? After 2008 and 2020, they also aggressively follow the US in printing, and up until now, it accounts for about 40% of their GDP. Japan? Even more exaggerated, they followed the US aggressively printing money in 2008 and 2020, and it now accounts for a staggering 105% of their GDP. Even mainland China, after 2008, though its money printing to GDP ratio has decreased, it's still around 35% today. In other words, in the money printing race, the relative intensity of US money printing is less than that of Japan, Europe, and China. More importantly, after every economic crisis in the US, after the Fed prints money, the intensity of printing by Europe and Japan is often much greater than that of the US. So, even though the US prints money, but as long as they can get other countries to print even more aggressively than US itself, the dollar can still maintain its value. And now I'm telling you, the Federal Reserve has already been continuously lowering interest rates and has stopped quantitative tightening, stopped draining money out of the market. The next step, quantitative easing, is not far away. What does this mean? The most critical point is, once the US starts printing, your own country might print even more aggressively than they do. So, can you still say this has nothing to do with you? If you don't want to be a victim this time, and even wants to climb to a higher class, then you could subscribe to my channel, because I'm gonna be giving you more information like this. And if you're worried you forget everything after hearing it, and you don't want to waste your time, you can like this video, and it will be automatically saved in your playlist, so you can come back and follow it anytime. First, the Fed started cutting interest rates last year, right? They've cut rates 5 times so far, bringing the key rate down to 3.75%, right? And then something historically terrifying happened. This chart shows the interest rate for paying off US credit cards. You'll notice that whether it was the 2000 dot-com bubble, the 2008 financial crisis, or even when the pandemic first hit, this rate only ever peaked around 16%, meaning 16% interest was historically the highest level of pressure. As soon as the rate hit 16%, it would turn around and fall. But today, that credit card interest rate has shot up over 21%. What does this mean? It means that US banks are now basically handing out 21% legal usury to most ordinary people. So the question is, didn't the Fed cut rates? Why are regular folks being forced to take out usury? Think of it this way. The bank wants to do business today. If it doesn't have cash, it has to borrow from other banks or the Federal Reserve. The interest rate the bank pays to borrow has been cut 5 times and is now 3.75%. When the bank borrows money from the Fed at 3.75%, it turns around and starts its lending business. Credit cards are one of the biggest parts of that business. So the 21% interest on credit cards is set by the bank itself. More simply, the bank buys inventory from the Fed. The wholesale cost is 3.75%. When it sells that inventory to the customer, the retail price is 21%. The cost for the bank to borrow money from the Fed has gone down, but the interest rate they charge customers has gone up. It's not just credit cards. Like we discussed before, mortgage rates have also spiked to 6-7%. In short, the Fed has cut rates 5 times. But whether Americans are buying a house or just buying clothes and having drinks, their borrowing costs have instantly soared. Why? Hold on. Let's look at the September non-farm payroll data and the unemployment rate. You'll find that while the number of people hired was only 119,000, worse than the past, it was still much higher than in previous months. On the other hand, the unemployment rate jumped to 4.4%, the highest in 4 years. What does it mean? It makes no sense. More jobs were created, but more people are also unemployed. There are only 2 possibilities. First, one of the data is fabricated, but whether the employment or unemployment data are fabricated, neither scenario is good. They both indicate that more Americans are losing jobs now than in the past few years. The second possibility is what the Wall Street Journal suggests. Large corporations are laying people off, causing unemployment to rise. These laid-off people can't find full-time jobs, so they're forced to take on part-time jobs, working 4 or 5 gigs just to get by. That's why the number of low-wage jobs has increased. This explains why both unemployment and job growth are high. It also explains why banks are giving out usury to ordinary people. Because banks know you're unemployed, you are broke, and you need to rely on credit cards to survive. The bank sees your risk of default skyrocketing, so to compensate for the risk of you not being able to pay them back, the bank raises the interest rate. Also, since you are already relying on credit cards for daily expenses, it means you've run out of cash, right? At this point, no matter how high the interest rate is, you have to borrow. So, why wouldn't the bank set the price high? Credit cards have always been a cash cow for banks. In the past, when everyone had steady jobs and incomes, they weren't desperate to borrow. We had to use low interest rates to attract them. But now, as Americans struggle to afford bread and butter and get poorer, the bank's job is definitely not to lower prices to save you or bail you out. On the contrary, we should be giving you high interest loans. This is when we make money the fastest, right? So, you see, when the economy is bad, this usury appears. To be blunt, it's called profit from other people's misfortunes. You lose your job, you have no money. The bank views you as high risk, so they drastically increase your credit card interest rate. You're forced to borrow at 21% to survive. Our debt compounds continuously, and you get poorer and poorer. Then the bank views your risk as even higher, and keeps raising the rate. This means no matter how much the Fed cuts rates, it's just pouring water into a bottomless pit. This money isn't flowing to these ordinary people. It's just boosting bank profits. Put it more simply, after the Fed's rate cuts, it didn't stimulate the economy, but they're making more people poorer, and the lifeline of the US economy relies on these increasingly poor people to consume. Consumption makes up 70% of US GDP when their spending relies on high-interest debt. What do you think will happen when they can't pay it back? And here's the more crucial question. Why are the high-interest loans now higher than during any previous financial crisis? This isn't just profiting from disaster. The banks themselves are sounding the alarm. In the 2020 pandemic, banks faced a liquidity crisis. Simply put, the banks themselves ran out of cash. So, the Fed secretly set up an ultimate weapon called the SRF, Standing Repo Facility. You can think of it as a 24-hour emergency pawn shop opened by the Fed for banks. If a bank is truly desperate, it can take the US treasuries it holds to this pawn shop and immediately exchange them for cash. The interest rate is fixed. This is a final lifeline, designed to prevent another collapse like the one in 2020. For 3 years since this pawn shop was designed, hardly any bank used it. Why? Because any bank that uses it is essentially admitting to the world that it can't survive and needs the central bank's emergency aid. So, no one uses it until the very last moment. But in the past 2 months, this emergency pawn shop that no one ever used has suddenly started seeing a line. Banks quietly started using it in September. By October and November, US banks were frantically pawning assets for cash. Plus, as I mentioned in the previous videos, bank reserves have dropped to the danger line. And the Fed's overnight reverse repo is almost empty. Money that was only supposed to be used during a crisis is now being used up. This clearly indicates that banks themselves don't have much money left. That's why, when they lend money to ordinary people who've lost their jobs and rely on 4 or 5 part-time gigs and credit cards to survive, the interest rate has to be high. So, the Fed has indeed cut rates, making the cost of borrowing lower for banks. But the banks still can't get their hands on cash. It's like when we run a business, the cost of inventory has dropped, but we can't get the inventory if we don't have enough product on hand. The product we sell to customers naturally has to be priced higher. This means the current rate cuts are not solving the bank's problem of insufficient cash. The only way to solve it, just like in 2008 and 2020, is to engage in QE and directly inject that cash into the banks. So the Fed has already stopped QT now. The next step, QE, is essentially coming in 2026. Why do some cleaning ladies, vegetable selling aunties, they have several houses? Do you honestly think they bought all those properties just from selling vegetables and sweeping floors? You might have more education than they do. But after saving every penny and living frugally, forget about a decent house. You can't even afford a bathroom. Why? It's because every time the US prints money, these aunties get a piece of that newly printed cash, but you don't. So your wealth gets diluted. Your money is invisibly transferred into their pockets, isn't it? Their original income might be lower than yours. That doesn't matter because, in the end, you're the one earning the money for them. The money you earned all went to them. They took the money and invested it. Now, you might be thinking they were just lucky because everyone you see on Instagram, your friends playing with stocks, Bitcoin, and gold, they're all losing money, right? I'll tell you what. That's because most people don't realize they're constantly playing a game where they're more likely to lose than win. In the stock market, 3/4 of the time, it's difficult to make money, even losing money. They don't know that picking a stock that surges has nothing to do with whether we study finance, know how to read financial reports, or whether we spend hours staring at the trading screen. Instead, what you need to do is play a long-term profit game like running a casino, where you lose $1 when you lose, but you win $100 million when you win. So here is the crucial part. If the Fed starts printing money, what assets should we be positioning ourselves in to get a piece of that cash? Listen up. If you wait until the moment they actually start printing to position yourself, it'll be way too late. All the asset prices will have already been pushed sky high because we were already positioned ahead of time. And when we select assets, we choose those that are already in a bull market. Simply put, is assets that trend up with big spikes and small dips. This way, we aren't constantly forced to take a loss or take a profit. Take silver as example. Back in June of this year, I moved most of the money I made from gold over to silver. All of this is documented in videos. It can be faked. I did this because silver broke through a resistance line it hadn't been able to break before, which is the blue line around $34. And after I bought it, it shot up. I just held on to it because I set my stop loss right at my entry price, around $34. If silver dropped below $34, it would automatically sell. This way, I would have played the game for free, without any loss, protecting the money I earned from gold. Since I bought it, it's always been big spikes, small dips. It spends more time going up than going down. It's a classic bull market. I just held it and didn't do a thing. It was making money for me every day. That's why I didn't have much to share with you for a while. Till October this year, it hit $54, which is the green resistance line. It suddenly started to drop, and on one of those days, it fell more than 8%. So, my strategy was to secure some of my profit. I sold half of my silver, locking in nearly a doubled profit, and the rest of the half, I'll keep holding it. This ensured that, at the very least, I didn't play this game for nothing. I already walked away with half the profit, and later, after silver corrected, it broke through that $54 resistance line again. I immediately bought back the silver I had sold earlier. Then, when silver reached $59, which is the purple line, our system flagged a perfect optimal buying opportunity. So, as it broke through the $59 resistance line, I added more silver to my position. In comparison, gold hasn't performed as well as silver. After I took some profits in October at that pink resistance line, I haven't found a chance to buy back in yet. However, gold is still an asset I'm watching closely. Even though there's been some negative news for gold, like Russia is selling gold, the charts still show no signal to suggest that. Gold's bull run is over, and my positioning is always based on the charts. If you have a better understanding, welcome brothers and sisters who have a different opinion. Feel free to leave a comment down below to discuss with us. Alright, if there are details in this video that you don't fully understand today, I suggest you watch my previous 2 or 3 videos. Because the logic is all interlinked. Due to time constraints, I have to end here. But what do you anticipate in the next episode? A lot of people are waiting for this line every week. It's gonna be a crucial one. Alright, I'll continue sharing tips on how to become wealthy, how to be an entrepreneur, an investor, and achieving financial freedom every Sunday at 8:30. If you don't want to miss out, make sure to subscribe to my channel and click the little bell, and generously share this video. I sincerely wish all of you who like this video will reach financial freedom soon. As long as you can find 1 or 2 useful sentences in today's content that can help you live a better life, I'll be completely satisfied. Alright, I'll see you next week. Bye.